Hello and welcome to Talking Europe. We're approaching an EU summit which is likely to be crucial for Ukraine and for its European partners. At stake is the formal opening of Ukraine's EU membership talks and a budget deal which, if approved, would give Ukraine a support package of 50 billion euros over the next 4 years. But squabbles over the EU's long-term budget have put a question mark over the proposed aid to Ukraine. Meanwhile, Kiev says that it has received 300,000 shells from the EU so far out of the promised 1 million. That joint European procurement of ammunition will also be in the spotlight at that important summit in Brussels. Well, for the Ukrainian perspective on all of this, I'm joined by Olha Stefanishyna. She is the Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration in the government of Ukraine. She was appointed to that post in June 2020. And she also chairs a number of important committees related to Ukraine's alignment with the EU, for example, on the green transition. Deputy Prime Minister, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. Nice talking to you and this yellow-blue colored studio.
So you're in France. What have you been talking about to French officials, and particularly on the whole weapons question? What are you expecting from France at this point?
Well, as usually, we're always expecting the strong leadership of France in many issues. Especially on all European agenda, but France has chosen a path of leading by its example, and it's been one of the first countries who has prepared a multi-annual budget of military support for Ukraine, giving the clarity and predictability for its domestic industries and companies, but also basically giving the unilateral security guarantee for the sustainability of support.
Joint production of weapons as well. This is another thing that you're looking at with France at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah. So France has been one of the most largely represented countries at the defense industries meeting in Ukraine. There's another meeting taking place in DC, and this is a very practical example to all the other countries. Yeah.
Why do you think at the EU level, though, there is this shortfall between what was promised in March of this year and what's actually been delivered?
1 million shells, this was the ambition. This was the joint target. And this was the reality check when we are with the 300,000 shells provided and produced. So it's also a process which identified the weaknesses and basically gives us the understanding that we have a lot of things to do at the all-European level.
I want to ask you about this aid package, which I mentioned in the introduction, the 50 billion euros. If you were to get that, what difference would that make concretely?
Well, first, what we have to understand, that's 50 billion ambition for 4 years is also a target. It's including the resources which Ukraine has to get access to because we're part of the accession process. That's obvious. There is a part which is part of the macro-financial assistance. So it's not all like the gift of 50 billion. So there's the grants, the loans, the investments, and now a very interesting idea of onboarding to this facility the benefits from managing the frozen assets. So it's not the frozen assets per se, but the additional leverage, financial leverage gain on that. So it shifts the burden from the member states to some extent. It gives a bit different angle. So it's very important that we have been united and mobilized over these financial ambitions, while the instrument throughout all of this 4 years could be different and the needs could be different. It's not necessarily this huge amount of resources within this package.
You are obviously waiting for a strong signal from Brussels on EU membership talks. I just want to play us one of the most recent tweets from the Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orbán, who said that it is clear that the proposal of the EU Commission on Ukraine's EU accession is unfounded and poorly prepared. There is no place for it on the agenda of the December EU Council. What's your gut feeling? Do you think he's going to veto this?
Well, it is not the report in Ukraine. It's the enlargement package reform report. It covers all 9 enlargement countries. And the very fact that it does not cover Moldova means that probably there's a, let's say, special gut feeling of Prime Minister Orban on Ukraine. So it's definitely not about European Commission. And Ukraine has been a golden standard of the merit-based approach. You know, no country in the whole world will be able to form the anti-corruption system of bodies and relaunch the judicial reform within a year and to start the constitutional court reform.
We'll come back to the reforms, but just on the whole European political climate, do you feel it's changed though now? Because not only is Orban tweeting this kind of thing, but we have the return of Robert Fico to power in Slovakia, who says he's not going to send any weapons, although private companies, of course, can still do that. And importantly, we have Geert Wilders, who won the election in the Netherlands, and he's against any further expansion of the European Union. So do you sense kind of cracks now in the EU?
It's definitely a turbulent period, especially ahead of all EU elections taking place just like in less than half an hour, half a year. So it is turbulent, but at the same time, it is a reality that Ukraine brought back the agenda of the whole enlargement. Mm-hmm. It is clear that enlarged, strengthened, and reformed Europe is the strong Europe. And we are obliged to overcome these challenges. On the other side, it's a very important decisions for Ukraine on 15th of December to be taken. But on the other side, they are very technical. They're very technical. It's not the accession. It's not the mandate for the negotiations. It's just the decision to start the accession talks. And it should be taken to preserve this unity, this attachment to European project, but also to give a signal to Western Balkan countries.
You mentioned, you acknowledged that it's a turbulent period. One other element that we have to mention in that context is the situation on the border between Poland and Ukraine, and your government has described this as catastrophic. The Ukrainian truckers that are stuck along the border, Poland saying that it's facing unfair competition from Ukrainian truckers. How do you think this should be resolved?
I expect a stronger engagement of the relevant people in European Commission. There is a...
Does that mean penalties against Poland, potentially?
No. It's like European Commission has the unified competence in trade issues, and European Commission has a trade commissioner, a transport commissioner, and these are people fully mandated to work on this situation. I think that their efforts could be really strengthened in that regard, and they really have to handle this situation. It is obvious that situation in terms of trade would not look the same it was before 24th of February, when Ukraine has full access to the Black Sea, the Azov Sea. We had a flight connection. Now there's nothing that we have. And the situation was supposed to be heavy, and basically this has to be handled.
Let's go back to the question of reforms in Ukraine. So the president of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, said that you'd completed almost all the 7 steps that you needed. This was in November. I gather they have actually been completed now, the 7 steps. Is that right? So what happens next then in the early part of next year on the reforms in that case?
I think that the major message we heard from the Commission is that completing the 7 steps doesn't mean completing the reforms. It's completing the 7 steps. So the major message that we heard that the reforms should be continuous. So we should show permanently the sustainability of this transformation and the results of it. So setting up the anti-corruption infrastructure is one thing, but making it work is a different thing. We have it fully enforcing in Ukraine, and we have a lot of let's say, issues showing the good track record, and relaunching the judicial system and bringing the actual justice is also a process. So we continue.
There's also the occasional things that are in the news which aren't very good for Ukraine's image. For example, the lawmaker who was on the anti-corruption committee who was arrested for allegedly trying to bribe someone. This is the kind of thing that obviously rings alarm bells in Paris and
but
Brussels.
He was arrested.
True.
He was investigated, and it has become public because the institution work, they investigate, and it just shows that nobody has an immunity of that.
I want to ask you a quick question about NATO as well, and what signals you've received from NATO this year, and also something that a former NATO Secretary General, Anas Fogh Rasmussen, said, which is that Ukraine could, he suggested a sort of solution where Ukraine would join, but without the territories that Russia currently holds. Can you imagine that sort of deal or compromise?
Well, we have as a privilege as a politicians at war. We are forced to think on a very practical things, which are leading to our victory or our survival. So I don't think it's a very practical thing, and I don't know to whom was this suggestion. This was just something thrown in a public discourse. It might be discussed, but we are not yet there. We are totally on a different path since Vilnius summit, because Vilnius summit has identified that Ukraine becomes a member of NATO. There are no territorial clauses, and we are moving towards that. And we have just recently identified the reforms needed for this purpose. I mean, the political, because Ukraine is very much integrated already, and the institutions which are working in that regard.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for being my guest, Olga Stefanishina, the Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration in the government of Ukraine, joining me here in the Paris studios.